As Pastor Paul and I are coming up here, and before we present, we wanted to turn your attention to, we'll be presenting a video before this session and also the next session. The video for this session has to do with, as Pastor Paul mentioned, our life together for the sake of mission. And all of you know that it's no longer just mission overseas, but mission in our backyard. And especially in Herndon, 51% minorities. We wanted to really extend, and the phrase we're using, especially it fits with our name, Open Door, to share the radical hospitality of Jesus. And we were mindful how so much of the way the kingdom of God is presented is in terms of feasts and abundance and extravagance. And so we wanted to live that out. And one of the places where we live that out is in our fall festival. So actually when I go home after this conference, we have to plan this upcoming one. It's a Saturday right before Halloween, and we just invite our neighbors over.
Last year, God placed a burden on our hearts to be salt and light in our neighborhoods on the one day of the year that everyone's door is open, Halloween. Many of us welcomed our neighbors to hot chocolate around fire pits. Some got to know new neighbors. Let's keep it going. God also challenged us to take a leap of faith and invite thousands of our neighbors onto our beautiful and spacious campus at the very first Love Herndon Fall Festival. We didn't know what to expect, but God moved multiple generations of our church. Countless hours were spent preparing for the event. 31 groups decorated cars and distributed candy at the trunk or treat. 15 local businesses did the same. Our pastors welcomed and shared free cider with our guests. 297 of us volunteered to welcome our guests, run parking, lead games, dance, pick up trash, and more. 3,500 people in our community experienced the hospitality of Christ through our church.
Dear Jesus, I know that I've sinned and I've done many wrong things. I thank you for dying on the cross for me. Thank you, Jesus, for paying the price for me. Today I accept your gift of forgiveness, and I choose to follow you and surrender my life to you, Jesus. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen. Well, the Bible says that Jesus Christ is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And it says that if you are following in that you are a child of the King. And I encourage you to live like heirs to the throne. Find a Bible, read God's Word and His promises that He has for you. Turn to God and talk to Him like He's your best friend. You can turn to Him and pray to Him any time of day or night. The Bible says that God is always there for you.
And ultimately, 1,400 of our guests heard the gospel. Fall Festival 2019 is around the corner. Join the work that God's already started and help let it rain the love of Christ on October 26th.
And we'll share a little bit more the details surrounding it, but we just wanted you to get a glimpse of our journey together as a church on mission. If you look up at the screen, so just to backtrack a little from our last session, so we were wrestling with this question, okay, if we are a church of one vision and we are unified in that vision and that direction that God has set for us, does that mean we do everything together? Does that mean we have to speak the same way, gather in the same way, organize the same events? Do we have to show up at every event together? Because the Korean-speaking side, they have 5 a.m. prayer meetings. I'm not going to go to that. We have evening prayer meetings, but they have their 5 a.m. So for us, what does it mean to be a church of one vision? And we started talking about, for us, it would mean that we would have 2 households. Now, the way this played out at our church was in 2009, we had the opportunity, and Pastor Paul mentioned this earlier, of building, the EC building a 500-seat sanctuary building on the same campus about 200 feet away from the Korean-speaking main building. The EC and KC would continue to grow as one church, but in 2 different spaces and 2 different contexts. Remember, 1-2-1 was the phrase that we kept using. Now, as this pledge took place, 2009, the week that we announced that we were going to start this campaign was also the week where the recession happened. It was one of the worst times that we could start a building campaign. But here's the great thing. Because of that, the construction companies around us had no jobs. So they were bidding low. So we actually got a really good deal. And as you heard in one of the videos, they had no other jobs. So what would have taken 2 or 3 years, they finished in about 10, 11 months on our property. And so we're very grateful for the recession. In 2009, we also had 3 EC members who are now elected as elders. We would now have KC elders, EC elders, and they would meet together monthly as a joint board. So monthly, they would meet separately, dealing with all the governance and shepherding issues on both congregations. But then once a month, we'd come together on a Sunday, and we would update one another, encourage one another, collaborate where we could grow in our vision together. In 2010, EC and KC now have separate budgets, but both agree to have a shared list of budget costs. So if you ever look at our church's org chart, budget chart, anything, you'll see 3 columns: the KC column, the EC column, and then the interdependent intergenerational joint column. And that's pretty much how our church is now. We're kind of like a church of 3s. The KC side, the EC side, and then the part in between where it fits both of us and where it makes sense for us to partner together. So in that 3rd column, you'd see things like our mortgage, missions, different missions projects, our Christian education. We share our Christian education and have one children's and youth ministry, our utilities. We also committed to one another through our bylaws. So our EC side, we put this in our bylaws together with the Korean, but it was us who initiated this. If either side ever leaves this model, because we wanted to rest the fears of the Korean side that we're not doing this so that we could leave eventually, we said if either side leaves this model, we're going to forfeit our property. So basically, it's our way of saying we're committed to you forever. Like pretty much, this is our wedding. Like we're committed to you, and they were very grateful. It was unnecessary, but they were very grateful that we would commit in that way.
As you build the church together, 2 households, but don't forget, don't be too idealistic about church on earth. We are all sinners, forgiven by the cross, covered by the grace, but still, we do have a sinful nature of self-centeredness. So we are not that naive to think that it will always be good. So that's why that, as Pastor John mentioned, that we have a bylaw, this and that. And for instance, like we have a lot of practical bylaws. For instance, that I'm retiring in 4 years. So KC cannot just, the Korean congregation cannot just invite their head pastor without agreement with the English congregation. Vice versa, English congregation, for some reason, after Pastor John wants to retire, they cannot just invite their English congregation pastor without blessing of the Korean congregation. and especially it starts from the leadership. So we do have a very practical laws, set on stone. We are doing all those things. Like you decide that, as someone says like, well, I had a vision, I heard God's voice that I don't think this is it. We'll bless him and let him go, but he cannot take property. So we do have all those things, and then also even the budget. Even between the couple, when I do counseling, after many years, and we don't love each other as we used to, but when you really go down to the bottom line is they're having a difficult time financially. That's what it is. Money matters. So even in the church practice, we do have a very practical steps. Like for instance, that Sunday school, by the population, we share the different budget. And then even I charge, I shouldn't use the term charge, but even our EC has to pay portion of our elderly program, because a lot of elderly people in my congregation are the parents of the English congregation, and those are the receiving end and not the giving end. So we basically have to serve them. So EC takes responsibility. We do share all that things. Like when you raise a kids, especially in Asian family, parents just pour out love, but like when you do that, you have an expectation to someday they will return back to me. But you know that it doesn't happen. Same way with the church. If you do that, and then you'll keep on building up unhappiness in you. So we make it very practical. From very early stage of the ministry, whatever they can afford, they are we just both are responsible for ministry, and then we share the cost. And now that English congregations are actually richer than us, I think. And then there's children's participating more and more in Sunday school. So we came to the place now that we're gonna pay Sunday school expenses 50-50. It used to be 30-70, 40-60, now 50-50. So, you need to have all that practical practice to grow together.
So just to reiterate what Pastor Paul was saying is, so our children's ministry, when we were all in our 20s and 30s, we had no kids in our children's ministry. So we, the Korean side just understood that and said, yeah, it's hard to understand why you would have to pay half, for instance. So we slowly started paying 10, 25, 30. Now we're at about 50, almost 50-50 with the Korean side. So we're just continuing to grow into our responsibility and support for the church. So for us, we've been growing in our life as two separate households. Here is a picture. It's the construction of our worship center. And then the second photo is a photo of our turf field. We have a turf field in between our two worship centers. And a story behind that turf field, we saw the price tag of the proposed turf field, and we said, why are we paying so much money for this turf field? What good is it for? And then Pastor Paul shared about just how a church is able to, that field is actually one of our hallmarks as a church, because it is the place where all the different generations gather after service. So after service, the KC side, the EC side, and the children and youth come out and either playing soccer or football, lacrosse, whatever is in Frisbee, and they just play there and they gather there. Because it's the turf field, it never turns brown, it never gets muddy. It is there all year long. It is green. And so we are out there hanging out, and a lot of picnics, intergenerationally, a lot of screen on the green. We project the movie on our wall, and we just hang out. And community side of it, people are coming out. The bottom pictures are the finished building of our worship center. Anything else?
Pastor John kind of made it sound really smooth process. But when we were going through the building, you'll be always short of money. So there were a lot of pressure not to build that turf field. It's very expensive if you ever tried it. But that's where that little bit, wisdom of the older generation coming. So we insisted that because that was basically on us. Because when they're building, they pay for their building, but we promised that to accommodate that, we have to make more parking lot and all that was Korean congregation is going to be taking care of that. So it is on us. So don't worry about the cost when we're going to stick with that. After all things done, I hear so many compliments. Whose great idea was They were so against it because it was so expensive. But that's what is one of the benefits of the two different congregations together. You can practice, you can see the synergy.
So with this, God has been very faithful and gracious to us, especially with so many changes. So there were changes. We were talking about bylaw changes, a building campaign, distancing ourselves, creating our own space physically, elders, creating our own elders. And on the outside, people might ask, are you guys splitting? Is there something wrong? Actually, people did ask, is there something wrong? Why are you moving out and now have your own separate budget and have your own elders? Is this a phase to secretly leave? Is not the case. If anything, God unified our hearts. Our KC was very gracious and supportive. They paid $3 million for the parking expansion because for the county, for us to build a new building, we also had to construct or build many more parking spaces. They took care of that upon themselves. Our EC building was a $4 million dollar project, which we were able to undertake as well. Even as two households, our EC leadership was very careful not to distance ourselves from our KC. This was not a split. And so we wrestled, how can we be two households and yet stay together? And then God would lead us in our story to be one family. And that's the next session. That's part of this session, but next part of our story. In a sense, we're one vision, and yet we're two households to pursue this vision in our cultural and generational context. But at the end, we wanted to say we're still one family. With the building project, this was our KC and our EC building committee. They came together. We leaned heavily on the KC side because they were the ones who've gone through this maybe 2 or 3 times before us. So they gave us the ins and outs of what to do. I think one of the KC elders sat on was part of a board on a bank. So their bank gave us the loan. Our EC side, we had the civil engineers, so they worked with us and helped set that up. So it really was a synergy of all the generations coming up. Just go on. And finally, not finally, second to last, we have a story of one family. So how would we as a church continue on as one family, even as two households? One, we grew as a family of pastors. As Pastor Paul mentioned, we hire candidates who have the chemistry, who want interdependent, intergenerational model and see that in the future. We also really focus a lot on the pastor's spouses. So we have a pastor's wife gathering once a month for support and prayer. They meet together. There's a Korean-speaking side and an English-speaking side of the wives, and then they meet all together once or twice a year to just enjoy fellowship. We also attend staff retreats. This is really important to us, together focusing more than anything on building relationship. Long time we had bowling competition between EC and KC, and then between seminaries. I think we started doing that. Trinity did all okay all the time. And then we also just would go through books together. So we would specifically choose books that were translated in Korean, so that Korean and English-speaking pastors could go through these books together. Growing as a family of elders, this was actually something kind of more recent and exciting for us. We meet separately as Casey and EC elders, but also meet once a month together on our joint board. And here's the part that was actually really exciting for me personally, is they created subcommittees. So you have a KC elder and an EC elder joining together as a subcommittee. They meet together to cover whatever projects, whether it's something with our bylaws or HR. So we have the same HR policies between KCEC, Christian education, missions, etc. And then together they do research, and then together they present best practices to the joint board. So it is never an EC proposal or a KC proposal, it's a joint proposal from the EC and KC side. Several things happen. Those two elders become very close friends. They enjoy working together. They also present best practices for our whole church. And for Pastor Paul and myself, we are seeing interdependence, intergenerational ties, not just between him and me, but now our elders are very actively engaged in interdependence and intergenerational, this model. We hold annual summits, evening celebrations. We try to make sure we laugh a lot together as elders. One final thing about family that's been really beautiful here at our church to see is see a minivan pull out into our church. It stops by the KC side. The grandparents slowly walk out and go into the KC side. Then they pull over to our student ministry center, the youth group building. The children go out, and then they park in our EC parking lot, and the parents come out. It's an intergenerational Sunday, interdependent Sunday. Very grateful to see one family at our church.
There is always a benefit of same age group together, because you have a common denominator, so there are convenience there. But think about in the ministry. If you have a church with all one generation, especially ethnic church, if your parents get sick, who's going to visit your parents? Because our English congregation members, now that parents are getting old, they get ill and hospitalized, our English congregation pastors don't speak their language. So our Korean side church, they contact us, and we go there and do the ministry for their parents, even though they are not our church member. So that's one of the family synergy you said. And then also one of the trend in East Coast is that many elderly from New York or Philadelphia or New Jersey area, after they retire, they're coming down to our area because their children's in our area. Because DC is one of the popular area for young generation. And then since we have a two different language group church, parents attend the Korean-speaking church and children attending English congregation. And then after service is done, their grandchildren coming out of the Sunday school, they get together in cafeteria having a meal together. And this is, isn't this the picture of the family? And that parents love it because, I don't know if you know it, but once you have grandchildren, you might think that you can just go visit anytime you want. You cannot. You have to make an appointment. I became a grandfather, and yes, it is reality. You have to take that shot and to visit your grandchildren, and then you have to make an appointment. And when they come to the church, that's the time that they can share what they heard that Sunday, and they can enjoy the fellowship. So we see this is actually true gospel-driven, family. That's what church is about, and that's what we. I don't want to give you the false advertisement of our church. Yes, we have some problem. Any family has a problem, but we do have a lot of those joyful memory together.
Our last, this is the last slide for our presentation here. One of the experiences that we had as growing together as one family around our vision, Open Door to a Life-Changing Grace, has been through a conference that we held at our church. 4 years ago, we hosted a church-wide conference with Christopher Yuan, Dr. Yuan, a Christian response to homosexuality. Now, the reason why this came up was because I was leading a small group in our home. And one of our members on the EC side, he was very nervously waiting to talk to me. And so our meeting ended relatively late, around 1 a.m. And he asked if he could talk with me, and he shared and confided that he was gay and that he is trying to understand what that means for himself to be a follower of Jesus while gay. He told me I was the second person that he's told. The first person was his discipler. He told me his parents, who go to the Korean side, they don't know. And he said, what should I do? How's this church, and how am I going to work on this, through this with my parents? So I immediately, just affirmed my love, our love as a church for him, and that we will walk through this together with him. I quickly was asking if Christopher Yuan could speak to our EC so that as a church body we could understand what this issue is and how we could lovingly share the gospel, share God's grace in the midst of this whole discussion of the LGBTQ and homosexuality. The Yuans came, and they came on the weekend of the blizzard. So they flew in, 3 hours later they had to fly out. So I was shaking my head. I was like, what happened? We were so looking forward to them coming. They had to leave, and they said quickly, please reschedule us. I mentioned to Pastor Paul, we had to reschedule, and he said, well, can you reschedule it so that they could come and speak also to the Korean-speaking congregation? So I said, absolutely. So then they came back on in September. The KC had all of their Friday night attenders. Parents came, including this member's parents. They were now in the audience. We asked the older youth group students to join us, and our EC came, and then Christopher Yuan and his parents. And it was great that his parents came, because they shared very much about shame, the shame as parents, what it was like for them to have a son who had same-sex attraction. Christopher Yuan talked about holy sexuality, and also, again, hitting that place of shame versus the gospel. And so we all heard it together as a church family. I don't know of many Asian American first or second or third generation hearing a topic like that all together and processing. Christopher Yuan's mother did an awesome job sharing as a mother's heart, and just her heart to pray for Christopher. We had translation subtitles going all throughout, so all the generations could hear that story. Do you
want to explain a little bit about who Christopher is?
So Christopher Yuan, just for you, those who don't know, I think you guys know, he's down the street from here. At Moody, he's a professor. He grew up dealing drugs and also practicing, homosexual, gay lifestyle, and then he went to prison. And it was in prison that he heard the gospel, that he gave his life to Christ. His parents in the meantime were both non-Christians, but it was through his ordeal, his journey, that they both became Christians as well. So all three of them minister together and share the testimony of Christopher's journey.
Is HIV positive, and I'd like to just clarify that, yes, we do love all kind of sinners, even homosexuals, but also we do not condone their lifestyle. So Christopher is, he's not practicing. And I remember that Pastor John just shared.
He's celibate.
He's celibate. But he has that in him. So what was great about Christopher's mother's sharing was she was a non-believer. And she went through prayer journey without knowing God because of the son. And through that, son came to the Christ and she came to Christ. And she shared that. And to our parent generation, it was very powerful. We have to admit that evangelicals, sometimes we have the homophobia. So this was a really important meeting for our congregation, that as we build congregation, church together as a family, there are some children of ours are going through their suffering. So we prayed about it and how should we, it's still hard. It's still hard for us. It's not very natural. But we're learning and growing to live out gospel-centered life for all people. That's what we are practicing.
So at this time, we'd like to pause, and Peter, the next session will be